Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our Can We Love History Too Much Project Lemonade webinar. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to just wait a couple more minutes for letting a few more people into the presentation. I see we have our location.
It's nice.
Yeah. Tim, do you mind putting yourself on mute while I talk in the beginning? That way the sound's probably a little better. Kate and Arnab, how does that sound? So we're just going to wait one more minute, then we'll go. So I guess now's probably a good time to start. I'd like to welcome everyone to our latest webinar from our Project Lemonade series. Today we have an illustrious guest from History Factory, Timothy Schantz. And so I guess we'll just go. So just to give you a little bit of information about digital transitions, those of you who don't know, we have four main divisions known as DT Commercial, DT Cultural Heritage, Pixel Cutie, and DT Scientific. Cultural Heritage, if you don't know, serves the cultural heritage sector. Pixel Cutie is our new service bureau, which performs imaging services for both the cultural heritage and for-profit sectors, and so forth. A little bit about, well, first of all, I want to give a big thank you to Kate Stone and Arnab Chatterjee, who put this event together. You folks did a fantastic job, as always. Kate is our manager of events and marketing, and Arnab is our technical specialist who helps out with all things in terms of imaging and also making events like this possible and so forth. Myself, for those who don't know me, my name is Peter Siegel. I'm the principal owner of Digital Transitions in Pixel Acuity and the founder of the Division of Cultural Heritage. So to our featured presenter, Mr. Timothy Schantz, History Factory, and I'm going to give a very brief overview on History Factory. Tim was going to fill in all the blanks because he's from History Factory. But History Factory is an organization that primarily serves the corporate sector. They manage and curate their archival holdings. History Factory has locations in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Virginia. DT and History Factory have a strategic partnership that was formed about a year ago. And presently we share a location at their Chantilly office, which serves as I would say collections processing facility, and in that facility we open up an imaging department there. And what's kind of interesting to us is that we managed to kind of seek each other out for a number of reasons. One, of course, is that DT Division of Cultural Heritage really sees corporate history as part of our cultural heritage. And obviously, both companies have a huge passion for history. History Factory has tons of expertise in the curation and processing of collections. And oops, I think we have someone else on here without. Oh, there we go. But they didn't have an imaging facility on site, so we got together to strengthen History Factory's portfolio, and obviously to grow digital transitions and pixel acuity's market space. And we all agree together that better imaging will definitely help tell a better story about corporate collections and their archives. So Tim has a fabulous background. We're very lucky to have him on today. And just to give his full bio will be distributed on a website, and I think Kate will do that as well. But to give a short introduction to Tim, he's a senior executive with broad domestic and international experience in both developed and emerging markets, and in a wide range of financial arenas, including asset and wealth management, corporate and structured finance, as well as investment merchant banking and alternative investing. He also has cultivated a lifelong interest in history, politics, strategy, and has served effectively both as a trustee and director and as an executive in the commercial and non-profit sectors. Mr. Schantz serves on the leadership team of History Factory in DC as its chief administrating officer and managing director of archives and content solutions, and as a vice chairman of Clear Harbor Asset Management in New York. Now, before I hand the mic over to Tim, I just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. I probably should have done this a little bit earlier, so forgive me with that. The chat window is open for questions, and we'd like to save all questions to the end. And there will be, to all attendees, we'll make available this webinar via recording, via email. And I'd like to say, please follow us on social media. When I say us, I mean DT, Pixel Acuity, and History Factory. And Kate will give you all the proper links, so forth, through a chat window. So without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to Tim. Tim, thank you for doing this, and the mic is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Kate and Arnab, especially for making this possible, and thanks to all of you who have the interest and patience to bear with me for the next period of time, as we'll be covering quite a lot of material, and I hope you find it of interest and value. I should begin really with a true confession, notwithstanding the title of this little talk, which may seem unusual for someone representing the History Factory. I have had a lifelong passion for history. I'm one of those probably annoying people who can't go through a town without stopping to read an historical marker or visit a battlefield or a cemetery and the like. So it's not surprising that I tried to convey that interest and passion to my kids with the hope of good results for their lives. Different from many, when their winter or spring breaks came around, we would always go off to historical sites. And I thought that that would be a great way to inculcate this passion within them all. Nice theory, not so much reality in practice. After one spring break that I thought was wonderful in Philadelphia, finally the kids came collectively to me after a particularly disastrous sidebar visit to Camden to see the death spot of Walt Whitman, one of my favorite poets. They came and said, we've had really enough of this. All of our friends get to go to Disneyland or World or sit on a beach or do something exciting like that. And we're tormented by these historical tours. With that in mind, the next year I busily organized that we would have a trip to the Caribbean. And they were absolutely nonplussed, disbelieving, etc. I think they enjoyed more crowing about it to their friends than anything else. By the way, it's always good on these things to have a little bit of a walk-away tip. I had never realized, but apparently there's a great price discount after April 1st, and that year spring break fell after the 1st of April. And we organized a visit to the island of Nevis, which, if you've never been, I can commend to you very highly. It's a gorgeous spot. And we literally had an opportunity to stay in an old sugar plantation there on the water. And the kids were beside themselves with joy and enthusiasm for the opportunity. Little did they know when the morning came that I assembled them all and said, right, we're off. At which point they looked disbelieving and quizzically at me and said, what do you mean? We're where we want to be. We're in heaven. And I said, well, of course, we're going to go see the birthplace of Alexander Hamilton. Their sense of betrayal at that experience, they've never quite gotten over. So much so that not so long ago, when I was in our basement and going through some family material, our daughter came down and her lovely brown eyes looked at me and said, Dad, and then for further emphasis, widened them and said, Dad, in case I really wasn't listening properly. And she said, you do realize that I'm throwing all this stuff away when you're gone. Only her phrase for stuff was only 4 letters, also beginning with an S. With that in mind, you might think I'm singularly ill-suited to give this particular talk. As I learned from the family experience, if I wasn't going to be successful there, I would try and evangelize more successfully in the corporate market. Our goal today is to persuade you that, in fact, just like with kids, sometimes we can try and love them too much, and we need to give them some space. And that also with history, there may be better and more effective ways to really support the cause than to love it overly much. I thought to begin with an inspiration from a local son here in the DC metro area in the eastern shore of Maryland, beginning with Frederick Douglass, who himself expressed the sentiment that history for its own sake was not the goal, but rather learning from the past in terms of its utility for the present and the future. We have a phrase for that at History Factory, courtesy of our founder, Bruce Weinbrook, which is start with the future and work back. And indeed, that governs how we approach everything that we do here, which is constantly testing for the contemporary utility of the work of heritage and of archives in particular. In the process of going forward, we're going to engage in some myth busting as well. But let's start by asking you all to suspend for a moment whatever your particular calling or professional skill may be, and ask you to assume, the role of a corporate executive, someone whose principal responsibility is not for caretaking archives or heritage management per se. You have a day job, you have bosses and budgets, and this is maybe a more peripheral interest and or responsibility that you've assumed. So a typical engagement for us begins with one of these individuals pointing us to a closet nearby, within which is material, stuff as we refer to. And that stuff can have many dimensions to it. Often as 3-dimensional objects, but equally film, audiovisual, and documents as well. Moreover, there's another side to all of this, and that, of course, is the digital expression of it. Here you can have a look at one of my computer screens. Shame on me. But in the contemporary world, there are also repositories of note. And these too contain valuable heritage content that need to be organized, preserved, and ultimately codified for communicating effectively within an organization. So the big elephant in the room, of course, is how do we reconcile these vastly different worlds of the digital and the physical, and particularly how to give them adequate expression in the current age. In an academic setting, often the opportunity is presented by a donation, a collection, and that in and of itself is sufficient cause for archival work. At History Factory and in the corporate sector, it's slightly different. There, we also have to ask the question, is this material significant? Does it matter? Is it the totality of the view of the corporation that we intend to provide? And so it's really just the beginning of the journey and not an end or goal in its own right. Moreover, the significance of the archival practice around it, of course, is that we are ultimately able to find and search the content so that it can be repurposed in a multitude of ways, and not simply lost in a universe of material. This is one area where size and scale really do matter. I often pose the question, if you think of your own home potentially, and if you have a library of maybe 100 books, it's pretty easy to find what it is. You could organize it by size, by color, by author, by topic, whatever you want, because the human mind has the capacity largely to recall that sort of material. But if you think instead of the New York Public Library, of course, it's a very different set of circumstances, and so too with a corporate collection. Let's begin with some definitions and maybe even start by what an archive is not. It is most certainly not enterprise records management. It is not simply a storage facility. It is not in the public arena in the case of a corporate collection. And it is not simply a curated thematic sub-component of an archival collection. Rather, it is this cumulative record of a company's unique heritage, the collective inventory of the business's experiences, and a chronicle of continuing corporate culture, carrying its story forward into the future. This is a big difference between the public arena of pure history and providing that extra component, which is the cultural specificity of the corporate entity. Let's begin there by thinking a little bit why heritage in the first place. And here I would like to take some inspiration from David Hackett Fisher and his book called Albion Seed, in which, in a tour of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, he came upon Gauguin's famous painting asking these critical questions. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? It seems to me in this age of pandemic and challenge socially and economically, as well as health-wise, there is no better time to reinforce a company's purpose by reflecting on how it is also managed through other crises. Other questions we might pose in addition to those that Gauguin offered. Why are we here? What do we stand for? And how will we get there? In my particular words, then, connecting people through time and place and unlocking the unique value of a given corporate's heritage. The why. Let's return for a moment to this distinction between archives and records management, considering the backward and forward look of Janus and what they share in common. Certainly, they have this backward-looking and forward-looking component to them, but the significance is the difference in time frame. In archives, of course, we are looking back a very long period of time, and importantly, equally, if not more so, anticipating literally the next decades, if not centuries ahead, of content and its value to future audiences and generations. Instead of being a comprehensive record of today, but time limited, as in the case of enterprise records management, it is in fact a very selective but perpetual look at a company's heritage. Speaking then to the vision that we have for corporate archives, I'd like to spend a moment talking about a global, integrated, and comprehensive archival repository. All of this made feasible, in fact, in a technical and digital age where we don't have to relocate physical collections from one environment to another, but can effectively merge them in a common database and digital repository that allows us to share and republish and repurpose those assets globally and to audiences and stakeholders of multiple dimensions. Of course, in order to do so, we have to first gather and capture the physical as well as the digitally born components of those collections, and selectively and strategically convert those physical assets where possible into a digitized rendering of them. This then creates those components of an archival program, from the basic storage to the database and catalog, which identifies all of the items in the collection, and then ultimately the display or digital interface component that allows them to be accessed broadly and republished and repurposed. This is building the foundation of a heritage collection and presenting the opportunity to leverage So all of this sounds expensive. Why bother? So this is perhaps one of the areas that History Factory can be a differentiator by utilizing the language of business to communicate effectively with communities that are not typically focused on heritage. Indeed, in a social media oriented age, the opportunity to take heritage assets and redeploy them on an ongoing basis is one of the most powerful elements to this equation. And to do so in ways that are sensitive to expense reduction, as well as recognizing the revenue enhancement potential of heritage assets through licensing and other means of monetization, as well as the less tangible benefits that accrue to stakeholders across the spectrum. Let's begin by talking a little bit about this notion of tangible versus intangible value. Returning for a moment to my attic, you can see there a depiction of my father and uncle during the Second World War. And I have no doubt whatsoever that there is some collectible value to that image, whether in an historical society, a museum, maybe even on eBay. But you can imagine, enveloped in our family narrative, it is literally priceless. So we want to move from that tangibility to the intangible value of redeploying that asset in a meaningful way that can communicate a story to broad audiences of people. Bringing it out of the attic and converting it into an intangible value may sound counterintuitive, but in point of fact, it is literally what we're talking about in terms of strategic value. Many people take great comfort in balance sheets and the accounting presentation of a company's value, but I would submit to you that that is just one image, one depiction, one perspective on reality and not reality itself. In point of fact, if we were to go back 100 years in time, the value of most corporations in the public arena would have closely corresponded to what was then deemed to be their intrinsic value, that is their tangible book value. Those days have long since gone by the wayside, where today in the S&P 500, somewhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of the market value of a company is represented by its intangible value. We believe that this is a critical component of assessing and strategically understanding the value of the raw material of heritage, that is an archival collection, by being able to convert those collectible assets into much more valuable assets for repurposing and become thereby a component of brand value in a corporation. So who really cares, though, within a corporation? Well, we would submit that there is quite a broad universe of interested parties, from revenue generators, those who are in the field of client and prospect management, those who see the opportunity for licensing and otherwise monetizing heritage assets, or in the not-for-profit field, development and fundraising, getting a little bit more removed from the direct revenue to design and product development, drawing inspiration from classic assets that may have pertained in the past, whether it be in textiles or footwear or any number of other areas that inspire contemporary design. Similarly, brand, marketing and advertising components of a corporation, PR, media, as we've referred to earlier, social media and general communications, also internal audiences associated with culture, HR, recruiting, training, employee and retiree engagement, and then, of course, risk management and liability mitigation, undeniable components, and in fact, for many years, seen to be one of the mainstays or anchors of the logic for investing in an archival collection. The question is then, of course, posable, when does one start? Well, you won't be surprised to hear probably from us that there's no time like the present, if one hasn't done already. The reason for that is uncorking this unrealized value in a heritage collection, but it is also related to the enormous cost of overstoring content or potentially losing it into the digital ether. It's very interesting in this respect. One might imagine that people were prone to throw things away. In point of fact, it is really not the case. In our experience, most corporations at some level are probably over-collecting and very hesitant to disturb any of the past. The snag with that is that once in a deep storage facility, the risk is that it not only stays there, but remains a cost concern for the company going forward, as large amounts of content are preserved for periods of time that are uneconomic. It's just one illustration to look at one of the practitioners in the field. If you were to read their analysts, their equity analysts' research, one of the great charms of that business model is the fact that many of the assets that are retained in these deep storage facilities have been there for 20, 25 or more years. What seemed cheap at the outset becomes very expensive as that content grows and grows. And the same is true if it's there or in a digital cloud storage environment. This content won't go away. In fact, it is growing at exponential levels, and there needs to be a strategy towards it, and this very faced into. How much to invest? Well, there's no question that brand value and intangibles are more qualitatively than concretely or quantifiably measured. That having been said, enormous strides have been made in this respect in recent years to try and put some metrics around intangible asset and brand value. It is also critically important to begin with a pragmatic business strategy associated with heritage management, and to also define the capacity and metrics for success that govern the relative level of investment. And one of the great contributions that a history factory has often brought to its clients is giving companies actually the confidence to deaccession material. It does not always mean, in fact, rarely, or it's not our intention that it necessarily means to destroy, but there are many ways down that path of deaccessioning, from donation to deployment as heritage as art, to considering deep storage for less critical assets, as well as ultimately to formal deaccessioning. So this is our representation of a formula for success, what we refer to as the ROI of authentic heritage content. Of course, as we started out before, the most obvious areas of opportunity relate to opportunities to monetize heritage assets directly. There are any number of clients out there that do derive those direct benefits. Many more who derive indirect benefits through design or other related derivations that still contribute indirectly to revenue opportunities. There are also the undeniable cost savings, reducing search time to make assets findable in quick order and in good condition, and in circumstances that allow them to be redeployed digitally in best resolution, coming back to the essential component of strategic digitization. And then, of course, there's also that less tangible component, which is the contribution to overall brand value. We would argue all of these are the objective elements that go into the equation. The denominator, of course, being the sheer scale of investment, and that can be structured in multiple ways and over time to ensure that the best possible return is derived from that investment. Implementation, of course, derives around workable policies and practices, engaging in extensive gap analysis and content creation strategies. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. As I mentioned, considering the reduction of the footprint responsibly to allow for acquisition policies that will grow the collection in meaningful and important ways, providing for strategic redundancy in multiple formats, and then ultimately coming up with the digitization blueprint that focuses on leveraging truly strategic golden nuggets within the collection and makes them available in an interface that is broadly accessible and redeployable. Again, visually depicting this conversion of physical and digital clutter into a usable and accessible archive that is made up of various components: the physical collection, the digital database, and ultimately that user interface that allows for digitized assets or born digital assets that are selected to be redeployed in a meaningful way. We also need to consider, however, risks that present themselves in the context of contemporary corporate archives. We would raise the issue that many collections face a challenge, as we all do collectively, as we're on the brink of an information dark age. That era in particular, that decade between 1995 and 2005, beginning the digital revolution, where today many formats are no longer accessible, where content was not organized in an archival standard, and therefore may be effectively lost in a maze of information that exists out there. All I need to do is to remind everyone of their home videos on magnetic tape that have now approached, if not exceeded, their useful life, and the urgent need for preservation and conversion of those assets so that they are survivable for future generations. In a digital age, one of the myths that pertains, of course, is that we can save everything, that it lasts forever, that it's cheap and findable. Sad to say, this is simply not true. It is one of the great challenges that we face, and this is yet another pressing rationale for investing in a corporate archival collection. In addressing this digital black hole concern, we need to focus first on what's at immediate risk. I mentioned about magnetic tapes, but there are many other assets and formats, hard drives that are no longer readable, and other inaccessible forms of content that need to be brought forward into in a format that is accessible today and for the future. Moreover, associated with these issues and the obsolescence of formats and equipment is the absence of systematic organization and search capacity, which, even if the assets survive, makes them largely unfindable or not accessible within a reasonable period of time, and pretty well lost in the context of corporate sense of urgency. All archival initiatives should begin with a plan, and that plan needs to address the issue of selecting assets. We are not here in any way, shape, or form to promote saving everything. Selection is a critical component of the archival process. Moreover, just because you have a corporate archive does not mean that you have everything there is that is of value. So in addition to selection from within the archive, we need to fill in gaps. This all goes to the topic of creating living history. We do that through a number of means, whether it's through discovery programs, reaching out to audiences that may be private repositories of valuable content, through oral histories and what we refer to as story arc informational gathering sessions, where we capture the undocumented record, which can often be as valuable as the documents, images, and so on that typically make part of an archival collection. Moreover, we can't ignore third-party repositories, which can be critically important agents of information. In this respect, there is no better time than the present. We are living through an extraordinary period of time. Many would refer to our current year as unprecedented in multiple dimensions. It is certainly historic, and it is critically important that corporations, as well as other prospective repositories, intentionally gather materials from this period, both to document the pandemic as well as some of the secondary and tertiary effects that have arisen from it. To this end, if one has an interest, History Factory, in fact, pro bono, has developed a COVID-19 memory website, and you're welcome to refer to it as a source of business history about the responses to the pandemic. In addition to labor savings associated with access, research, and distribution of heritage assets, as I mentioned earlier, there are other ways to critically address that denominator in our ROI equation. Intentionally thinking of heritage artifacts and documents and images as art and actively deploying them in office buildings and otherwise. Spreading out the investment in the improvement of a collection over multiple years. Considering the degree of processing that is appropriate. It is not the case that every single item within an archive needs to be processed at an item level, though obviously those that are digitized and in a DAM format need to be so, but there are many other strategic ways to consider what is economically possible within the context of a corporate archival collection. And as need be, deep storage is a solution for some less valuable, less sought after content, so long as it forms part of that archival collection and can be readily recaptured as needed. And then lastly, of course, there is the option and the consideration for deaccession for redundant items, for those that are not unique, and potentially even converting them into opportunities for sale or auction. This then is an image of what we would consider a model heritage collection, global integrated heritage management collection. The corporate archival collection, of course, is of great significance, but there you can see depicted the opportunity created to augment it through secondary and tertiary repositories. The critically important role of creating living history through oral histories, discovery programs, audiovisual, even crowdsourced and digitally born content, all of which create this opportunity for specifically curated content that gives us content banks, social media, exhibits, websites, museums, and books, whether they be physical or ebooks. This is a particularly apt time to consider the need for addressing inadequacies in history. We live in a time of increased and appropriate focus on diversity and inclusion. I wouldn't be the first to point out that many collections are inadequate to tell that story, and therefore it is important to consider these opportunities to create and document living history through these various mechanisms to ensure that the totality of a community is represented. It is also important for facing into those aspects of history and specific corporate heritage that may not be the most becoming, that present troublesome aspects, and to really get one's arms around those uncomfortable moments of past, so that the narrative becomes that of the corporation and not just random or sacrificed ultimately to less charitable sources from outside. So it's good here to reference Churchill, who intimated that history would be kind to him because he intended to write it. And indeed, I think it is appropriate during this era that companies be very proactive to make sure that they are on top of all of the elements of their heritage and that they can speak effectively, transparently, and honorably about all of those elements, the good, the bad, and the ugly. In our quest on behalf of our clients, we refer to the goal of searching for golden nuggets. That is the choicest morsels from within a corporate collection. But it is important to represent or to acknowledge that these are not the totality of a collection. So for this purpose, like to depict it as a pyramid drawn from the inspiration of our own Great Seal on our $1 bill. And let's think about the collection with the eye there, the eye of providence looking down over the United States as that component which is item level processed, that is digitized, and that is most readily redeployable and accessible to broad audiences. For some, those greatest hits, if you will, may be all that is sought. But we would point out that there's often, appropriately, much more to a given collection. And we need to be able to drill down in that pyramid to ensure that all of the assets that give full expression to a given corporate heritage and culture are captured. This is yet another one of the myths that need to be dispelled. A digital asset management system is not an archive. It is just a representation of carefully curated components of an archive, but it is not the totality. Where to house? We often say at History Factory that one of our biggest competitors is our clients themselves, because of course, one opportunity is to do it yourself. Our bigger worry in that respect is that it's not done at all, that it is perpetually a ball kicked down the field and never really addressed. So it is our job to evangelize effectively within the corporate sector, to try and bring forward the time urgency of investing in collections and making sure, whether they're done internally or ultimately outsourced, that they address and answer some of these key critical components associated with effective and responsible storage of an archival collection. I'm always inspired in this respect by the management consultant Peter Drucker. And we do aim to be effective primarily, that is, doing the right things by a corporate collection, at the same time as we pledge to do them efficiently by doing things right along the way. With whom to partner strategically? Well, a lot of that is a strategic fit and personality, to be sure, and common goals and understanding and aspirations. This is one of the reasons that we and Digital Transitions, Pixel Acuity have partnered together. We felt them to be literally at the top of the field in conversion work and wanted to incorporate them as integral parts of our equation by co-locating on site in our archives lab in Chantilly, Virginia. We believe we're able to not only qualitatively, but cost effectively deliver the best possible outcomes for our clients and ultimately for those heritage assets with which we're charged. There are many models that can serve in the corporate sector. It's critically important to demonstrate one's nimbleness and flexibility and be responsive to the circumstances of a client. So we do work at times with clients on site. We do most and much of our work at our dedicated archives lab in Chantilly. But we do have, as I mentioned, off-site locations even currently, one in Jersey City, working on a major corporate collection there, and another in Jacksonville, Florida as well. And then we have hybrids, where we work on improving a given collection in the lab, only to return it to a purpose-built repository at a given client. Whether a prospect or client ultimately chooses to work with us in terms of their archive program, our overarching goal is that whatever model is that we are able to persuade them to ingrain a system within the very fabric of their brand and company that provides for the continuous flow and creation of content, its collection, its systematic appraisal and weeding, its responsible preservation, the authoritative arrangement and description of material and through cataloging, and then a strategic plan for digitizing high reuse assets so that they can be broadly accessible under an appropriate governance structure within the company and made distributable to multiple stakeholder audiences. Like to return for a moment to our current age and this notion of creating living history, which again I feel is particularly appropriate and timely given the living history of our moment in 2020 across a range of considerations. Just highlighting here a number of dimensions of the social media age and how, interestingly enough, heritage assets fit so well into it. After all, where else will you find genuine, truly authentic content that is abundant, is actually yours with the capacity for rights management control at the asset level and ultimately is free? It's a difficult combination to beat, and we believe it is a compelling argument to address the dictates of this digital age by focusing on heritage assets. I'll tell you just one interesting story from one client experience. The suggestion is often made that millennials aren't interested in history, and they would tell you very assertively, this firm in the spirits business, that it's quite contrary. They actually attribute the secular growth in their line due to the fact that millennials love to focus on heritage assets, not only in their visitable sites, but online. And in fact, they believe that it is the rich tradition and longevity of that brand and their ability to inform it with authentic illustrations of their past and their quality, including also the crises that they've faced into over the years that has been so engaging with new audiences and consumers. Moreover, this digital age has created an opportunity for metrics for what might previously have been thought to be the unmeasurable, and in the future will undoubtedly be enhanced by artificial intelligence and growing opportunities to be able to get our arms around the value of some of these notions. That having been said, I would like to assert that some of the biggest movers in human experience and history, all those things that we're not supposed to talk about at Thanksgiving, politics, love, and religion are in fact can be seen historically to have been the biggest drivers of the human condition. And the fact that something may not be measurable doesn't mean that it isn't relevant. And equally, the converse of that, because something is quantifiable doesn't mean that it is worth measuring itself. That having been said, social media and the metrics and analytics associated with it are undeniably giving us insights into even less tangible emotions and considerations in the present time that hitherto wouldn't have even been considered possible. If you don't mind, towards the end here, before we get to questions and the like, a little bit of a plug for our firm, History Factory. Been in the business for over 40 years. We pride ourselves in putting our clients in heritage first. Heritage here broadly representing also our people who are foundational, since almost all of our talent was drawn to the firm by a corresponding passion for the topic. We have on our team historians that research, discover, edit, develop, interpret, curate, and tell our corporate stories. We have a user-driven and accessible archive program focused on the value to the business of today and tomorrow, and not just the past. And obviously in our archives lab, the safety and security for physical and digital assets, both according to best practice in the profession. And moreover, we have the tools both in-house and the flexibility to work with those of our clients for accessibility in digital interfaces and cataloging systems as they see fit. This is particularly important, if I may say, in a post-COVID world where many corporations are potentially reconsidering their footprint, especially in the highest cost urban centers, where one might reasonably ask, might an archives get out of that closet in the 34th floor of a building in Manhattan and more responsibly be cared for in a purpose-built, environmentally sound and secure location with professionals caretaking it on a daily basis. In thinking about the History Factory, I often refer to us as something akin to a university with a faculty of art and a faculty of science. Science being our archival practice and the art being our interpretive and creative component. They are very different disciplines governed by very different professional skills and personalities associated with them. But there's no question that where we intersect and where we intersect most formidably is in the digital arena, is where we are most powerful and where we have the most impact with our clients and in the world beyond. That digital intersection is our goal across the firm, and where our partnership with DT Pixel Acuity is among the most central aspects of it, as we're able to convert more and more of our client collections into digitized content. So again, to conclude, what we offer is a cost-effective and efficient approach towards a rationalized and sustainable archive. We have appended to that unique creative capacities that allow us to work with a client to express the true essence of their corporate culture in genuine and truthful and transparent ways, and to help chronicle not only their heritage, but their current and unfolding living history through these challenging times. Ours is an anticipatory and proactive source of content that can be deployed through all of the tools and channels that relate to corporate communications and marketing today and support brand value and PR initiatives across the firm. It's our goal to partner to help preserve, capture, codify, and communicate given clients' history. And we are accessible either directly at tschantz@historyfactory.com or through our website. In closing, I would like, as a bookend, to finish by quoting Frederick Douglass, who made the statement that memory was given to man for some wise purpose. The past is the mirror in which we may discern the dim outlines of the future and by which we may make it more symmetrical. This, in my view, is how we learn to love history, not necessarily less, but better and more effectively. Thank you again. Appreciate your time.
As always, very insightful and interesting. So now I think we'll open the floor to and so forth.
So there's a question here asking what DAM History Factory uses and recommends. So there are really two components to that response. We first and foremost will always be guided by our clients' interests. And as I mentioned, our goal is to be as flexible and nimble as possible and to accommodate them whenever possible. So we've worked in any number of dams that are deployed by our clients. But then we also offer our own. and that is attractive to many clients who, for a host of reasons, do not want to get embroiled in perhaps the complexity or politics of an internal dam or the IT-related complexities that may pertain there. So we offer our own solution. We have both a proprietary database for cataloging, which we refer to as Luminarc, and then we deploy a digital interface on a platform that is called Tandem Vault. So the next question is, what is the process for determining what is relevant for the future and what is not? Aside from redundancy, I'm interested in the culling process. So that's a great question, one that's challenging to respond with great specificity, as obviously the clear one in terms of redundancy is a factor for reducing footprint. There are many records, HR-related records, and other confidential records that don't require long-term retention and are not truly archival. Some internal bookkeeping and other related items that often clutter up Iron Mountain and other related deep storage facilities are certainly not archival in nature. So we draw upon our experience, and that's one of the fortuitous elements of this, as was alluded to in the slide, the Janus slide, looking backwards and forwards, that we have many clients with very long histories, some with over 200 years, others with 20 or fewer. And the experience of working across industries and in multiple sectors has given us quite a lot of confidence in assessing and appraising just what really is of value for long-term posterity and multiple stakeholders. Increasingly, what is also important in this process, and this goes to really the other side of reducing the footprint, is ensuring that the collection is comprehensive. I'll give an illustration of a client that we had that has a wonderful archival collection. It's actually stored with History Factory, and as we approached a new milestone for them, we actually took the lead to say, you know, it's a great collection, but it's not telling your current story. It's not global. It doesn't address diversity and inclusion, which is one of your main stakeholder thrusts. And it omits important and critical information about one of the driving forces of a business that was largely developed in the last decade and didn't typify its earlier years. So those are all elements we believe, going back to our mantra of starting with the future and working back. What is critical is to understand what are the contemporary business issues, what are the future goals and aspirations of the client, and ensuring that the collection has meaningful content that gives expression to that. In the process, it's important to evaluate what is in an archival collection as to whether it is truly meaningful, really enduring, and then ultimately, economically, is it sustainable? And if it is not sustainable, working with the client to understand what is the most responsible thing to do about it. One last anecdote in that regard. We had a recent client engagement with a very long, rich, wonderful history, but the reality is its founding businesses are no longer represented in its current businesses. So we worked intentionally with them for a protracted period, improved the collection, and then prepared it for donation to some public repositories in their home state. So it is not the case that everything becomes bin ready, although for some content that is also the appropriate solution. But we can try and exhaust every other possibility first. I hope that wasn't an overly long-winded response, but it's a deep and important question.
Yeah, I actually have a question. Actually, there's one that came up from somebody else. So why don't you answer this one first, and if we have time, I'll ask mine.
Okay, so what is your process to evaluate and present project budgets for client digitization projects? Do you price per scan, by bulk, or some combination? So here I'm actually going to defer to the experts of our strategic partner, DT Pixel Acuity. But in our process, which precedes that, it is really strategically identifying through the appraisal process and the improvement work that we do on a collection, just which assets are likely to have the highest likelihood of broad demand and access for repurposing. And often that might be 10, 15, 20% of a collection. In other instances, it could be virtually the totality of the collection. It really depends on circumstances and the nature of the and depth and breadth of the collection and the affordability. Peter, shall I turn to you for preferred pricing, scan, bulk, or combo?
Yeah, I mean, generally, pricing is determined by what the end goals are for the image and the type of material it is and how it's stored, and obviously the quantity thereof. And that's generally how you determine how to price out a project. I know that's a pretty quick, succinct answer, but it's a lot of it just depends on what the ultimate needs are. So I think I can ask my question, Tim.
Okay.
This may be better over a drink or something. It's a little bit more philosophical in its format. But I know you serve both the cultural heritage community, or the nonprofit, and the for-profit community. And I've always been very curious about their perception of archives and the value of archives and how you process archives. And I'm just curious from your perspective, I mean, what is there a common thread that goes between the for-profit and the nonprofit sector in terms of evaluating their archives as a resource for, I guess for the corporation, the mission of the company and its culture? And on the flip side, an extreme example would be like the National Archives, where its mission is to serve both the executive branches of government as well as the population in general.
So as with the topic where we were contrasting and comparing also the similarities between enterprise records management and archives, but then the important distinctions, there are important distinctions between the corporate sector and the not-for-profit world. And I would actually divide the latter into categories as well, because there are those who are purpose and mission driven about historical assets. So their thinking and approach is very different than would be the case for, let's say, an association or a not-for-profit whose purpose was not the preservation of history. And in the latter instance, the parallels with the corporate world are quite strong. They also have to think about the economics of it, of being able to tell their story effectively, but within responsible economic constraints. In our view, one of the biggest challenges that people face is that faced with the scale of investment required to activate an archive meaningfully, many will do the worst thing, which is to do nothing. So they will wind up just saving things and actually aggravating the long-term problem. Without trying to be provocative anyway, I would submit that that's really the irresponsible thing. That's maybe the loving history too much part, which is not taking the difficult decision, which is really to step up to the plate, take a responsible investment decision, but then moderate it towards capacity. And that's where you then start thinking more strategically about the collection and saying, what really is harvestable and leverageable immediately, and what maybe do we defer for time, but still in the context of properly establishing intellectual control, the organizational principles, and really getting one's arms around what the collection can and should be for the future. And sometimes that means thinking smaller, if you will, than might aspirationally be the desire. But equally, and this comes back to the mission-driven organizations, and I think I began with this point, is posing the question, just because it's there, is this really the collection that warrants the degree of investment? Ought it to be processed at an item level? Is it to be wholly digitized? Or is this collection interesting, but maybe not of broad interest? Now, of course, those interests change over time, and we're seeing that unfolding before our very eyes in this time. So what might have been interesting to some audiences, 20 years ago is, not so much today, and vice versa. So I think one needs a practiced and thoughtful eye, and a really honest assessment of not only what you want the collection to be, but what resources are realistically attainable to make it so.
Very interesting. All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, so thank you. This is an incredibly timely question, which is some stories revealed in corporate archives may be embarrassing: financial scandals, racism, etc. What do you do with these? So I will speak very directly to the point. The narrative that you don't tell is going to be ultimately told by somebody else. And that is particularly the case in a social media age. I was maybe too nuanced in my earlier references during the presentation to it, but this is a very real problem. The instinct from many corporations and many corporate archives, as I think I alluded to, began in legal departments with liability mitigation first and foremost on the mind. But this question is really more about embarrassment per se than it is about tangible legal exposure. And there, I personally believe that the more one faces in to these difficult and awkward moments, the better it is. I'll use two illustrations, if I may. One is how German corporations have, by and large, faced to the very uncomfortable truths about their past. And by and large, let's just look at the German automotives. They remain some of the most highly valued brands in the world today. I think there is really no substitute for looking in the mirror and honestly and squarely dealing with that past. The risk, of course, is that you surrender that to a third party who will be digging, using alternative repositories and information, and may create narrative themes that are not only uncomfortable, but not true. Context is everything. There may be aspects or episodes to a corporation's past that, seen through today's lenses, are uncomfortable, but in and of themselves were not mean-spirited or malintended. And I think it is both the duty and the opportunity for a corporation to really face into those and bring them forward. I'll give one illustration, if I may, and here, I guess, disclosure, since one of them is my alma mater, but if you look at how Brown University dealt with this past under the leadership of Ruth Simmons, who was the president at the time, they spared no expense, no lack of transparency. They went full after to expose the founding members' complicit involvement in the slave trade. So, no embarrassing moment. I mean, they were literally some of the resources that were created that allowed the foundation of the university derived directly from a despicable aspect of our collective history. But they faced into it. They created out of it not only a detailed history of their exposure there, and responsibly dealt with it. They created, as a result, something called the Center for Slavery and Justice, which deals with the issue of contemporary slavery as well as historic slavery. Not so many people are aware that there are as many slaves in the world today as, actually more slaves in the world today than there were time of the American Civil War. So this is a chronic and ongoing aspect of the human condition. And I contrast that to other universities, which I won't choose to name here, who kind of swept it under the rug and have spent large amounts of resources and time and embarrassment to their brand having to contend with it because they didn't face into it and deal with it. So I realize this is a rather strong counsel, and some that not all of our clients have the stomach for, but I personally believe, both from a societally and historically responsible point of view, but ultimately I think also in the interest of the brand and the corporation, that in the long term it's in their best interest to deal with it directly in any of these areas, financial scandal, racism, worse.
Somehow it sounds like the truth always manages to surface itself.
I think so.
Well, Tim, I really appreciate you answering that complex question. It's not an easy one, and I'm sure cultural.
And this is a time, Peter, when many corporations need to dig, and sometimes I just put it out there. Sometimes it's more easily done by turning to a third party and actually outsourcing that research so that it can be as comprehensive and full as is necessary, so that there's no hint that the company is putting, a particularly egregious spin or suppressing information in the process, but has it really validated by an alternative source.
It's very interesting. I'm sure cultures also have some skeletons in their closets as well.
Absolutely.
Well, again, Tim, thank you so much for doing this. It was a fantastic webinar. I really appreciate your time and wisdom and insights and all this stuff. So again, a big thank you for that. And again, thank you for our audience for participating today. And I think at this point, we'll just wish you all a great rest of your day.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.